Just a quick background about me before we get started. Prior to starting Spendflo, I used to run the business operations team for a company called Volta Charging based in San Francisco. And we went from seed to IPO during my time there. And my CFO didn't like me too much because I spent too much money on SaaS. That was when the idea of Spendflo really came about. So we realized that there had to be one single system for you to actually buy, manage, and secure all of your SaaS vendors. And we do that with guaranteed savings at Spendflo. So, and without further ado, I'll hand off to Ajay here. And thank you so much for joining, Ajay. I know it's been you've had an incredibly unique experience over the last couple of years with Haptik. So would love your introduction as well.
Sure, great. Thanks, Sid. Pleasure to be a part of this journey of yours. And indeed, actually benefiting from our association as well, right, overall. So we use Spendflo for sure, and definitely helps us out. So thank you for that. Quick intro of what I do. I basically look after currently the customer experience, value and experience teams that deals with customer success and implementation. I also lead the finance, legal, and business operations team at Haptik. So that's a quick summary of what I do.
Awesome. Awesome, Ajay. So I just for the audience out there as well, just like some housekeeping. So if you have any questions, feel free to put it up in the Q&A section and run in the chat as well. We'll be able to answer any of them. And if it's particular to Ajay or you want me to answer, happy to do that just during the entire thing. We don't have a lot of slides. It's going to be a chat more than anything. But the topic that we're going to cover is the top priorities for CFOs in 2023. We've been working with a bunch of CFOs over the last couple of years. And obviously we see a stark shift, right? Like, oh, the SVB crisis just happened. Just before that, something happened. I think finance teams have been honestly the most inundated with work and sleepless nights now in the last couple of quarters. So Ajay, I wanted to ask you, right? Like, what are the three priorities that you have for this year, right? Like first, and why do you think they are? And also personal stories of why you think they've become priorities for you.
Sure. So I think, over a period of time, I've realized that particularly there are a few things that people have to start looking at differently to avoid all these, adverse crises that are just coming in off the blue from somewhere or the other, right? Everything looks hunky-dory on one particular day, and then all of a sudden, things are just not making any more sense. I think the first priority that I've learned literally at Haptik is the fact of customer retention. I think over a period of time, you realize that, a customer who's with you happy, and even if they're not making that stupendous growth across in terms of, quarter on quarter, they're doing all of that stuff. But I think retaining business is very, very, very essential. That I think is literally the first priority in my view. I'll give you a very quick example. I'm working with a government client. Won't name the person won't name the client on the call, but a government client who basically the project had got stalled for whatever reason, etc. They didn't have it as a priority. It was just continuing. It wasn't basically giving the right value add back and forth. And I think what we did was we went back, met the customer, discussed a lot of stuff in terms of the changes that had effectively happened, showed them a few things of what we actually do now, and how things have changed over WhatsApp, right? And believe you me, there was a complete 180 shift, and they were like, "Oh wow, why aren't we doing this?" And I think I particularly chose government to explain to this so that it's even in sectors like that where things are really very critical and wanting to improve, right? I think that for me is literally the number one key. I think the second one is obviously the most common and the most logical one is to basically have the cost reduction, right? In terms of what you're spending today, just keep monitoring your costs. Do you really need to do that, right? And I think that's where even you guys play a very critical role in terms of basically your existence. So I think synergies like these definitely required, but more importantly also, quite a few customers that I now meet, and in my recent trips across to probably a Delhi or a Bangalore, when I've actually met a customer there, and they're like, and I'm like, oh, sure, great. When are you coming to Bombay next? We could probably meet up or something. And the response is, hey, our travel's frozen. And I'm like, dude, I've just traveled and come back to you in your office, and you're telling me my travel's frozen. So I think across a lot of accounts, and I'm not saying, and please don't quote me wrong, but at Haptik doesn't mean you could travel when you want to, where you want to. right?
Yeah.
That doesn't
Yeah.
work,
Yeah.
right? No, we also have a very strict travel policy, but I'm just saying that it's one of the examples that is absolutely prevalent across everywhere, right? And
Yeah.
I think so. That's
That's the
one big
example
thing.
for just like something like low hanging fruit, like just
Yeah,
putting in a travel policy, like making sure you have control over it. There's something like a low hanging fruit, and also like leveraging
absolutely.
partners to do that as well.
Yeah, I think these are two very simple ones to basically put into execution, right? And I think a lot of
Yeah.
your basic housekeeping also in terms of going back and checking your G&A spends exactly on where it's happening. I
Yeah.
think a
Yeah.
lot of it is very, very clearly in terms of how you could also go back and monitor
Yeah.
costs. Of course,
Yeah.
the other places where you could actually monitor costs, is around the tech aspect of it and the infra
Yeah.
aspect of it as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, these are prominent examples of what you could actually do. And I think the third priority is, now that you've retained a customer, now that you've kept this, the existence of the business, right, is towards growing it. So clearly
Mm.
the third example is towards, or the third strategy for me is towards growing the businesses, right? Um, what is the customer doing today, right? And how do you basically build in the ROI for what they're doing? And effectively, what is their next problem on the list that you can basically help them put a check mark on? I think
Yeah.
that's what we go for.
Makes
So
sense.
don't, in my view, what I've always done is grown an account, but always done the top three things first, and then effectively grown it further down. Um,
Mm.
and that's how we've actually done this. Going back and saying, hey, we can do all 10 things at one go, I don't think it's always added value, because then even you are spread too thin to deliver 10 things, and your expectations from the
Yeah.
customers right up there.
Yeah.
But if you start with a smaller piece to come back and say, you know what, we're going to do these many things, and this is what's going to give you this much amount of impact, and then take it from there, I think then you're in. Once you're in, then effectively you
So
can always continue
effectively,
growing.
effectively what you're saying is that even from a growth angle, growing that existing customer as well is the key, right? Like, and the reason why finance actually has to prioritize it, it affects a bunch of your metrics, but at the
Absolutely
same
does.
time, it's something in finance's control, because you actually are the purveyor of all this data, right? Like you actually
Exactly.
see first before even customer success for that matter, or like sales for that matter, or your CRO for that matter. Like,
Yeah.
so, and you can see it in your collections, you can see it in your receivables, you can see it in everything.
Everything across. And also, I think even from a spend perspective, right? I think while it has the impact towards the business, etc., I think even from a spend perspective,
Yeah.
right? How does that translate into effective cost savings? Because it then
Yeah.
relates back into cost savings as well in some shape or
Yeah.
form. So I think
Yeah.
those are three strategies that I would ideally spend
Makes sense.
or work on.
Yeah, and so just to deep dive into the so obviously retention is one, the second is cost reduction, and the third is growth. Just to deep
Yeah.
dive into like just personal stories that you've gone through and you've done in the last couple of years on your cost reduction strategies that you've deployed, right? And give us an example of like two things that you think are some low-hanging fruit that people on this call would definitely benefit from learning.
I think two things that we've clearly done at Haptik is we've invested a lot into our infra savings, right? We've spent a lot of time and energy into going back and monitoring our infra spends, right? What are we really utilizing the CASs for? What are we really utilizing spaces for? What do we want to get out of it? Who are the customers? What is the value add that we're getting out of it? How much big is the customer? What are we exactly spending on? How do we manage to get better deals out of the whole existing infra setup outside Haptik, right? In terms of obviously larger players, right? How do you basically become a part of the larger ecosystem, right? In fact, even going back and monitoring, is AWS cheaper? Is Azure cheaper? How does it actually work? All your basic stuff that you would ideally want to do. I think it's something that we've gone back and put through. And this is clearly what we've done at Haptik, right? We are literally into the 10th year of our existence, but I think we still go back and look at infra and all of these costs purely as if we are still in year one.
Yeah, because all your technology costs and info, they change every month, right? People are buying new SaaS tools, the renewals are happening, your infra is changing.
Yeah. So I think all of that definitely, at some points of time, you also go back and look at it, oh, these are smaller numbers. No, but smaller numbers add up.
Yeah.
And I think that is one part that people often miss out, right? So even the smallest numbers needs to be really looked at. And I think that's something that we've done at Haptik. and the other one is obviously the low hanging fruits, right? We've gone back and looked at what we really spend overall.
Just like
on,
all your
on travel,
miscellaneous. Yeah.
all our entire small part, right? Travel, events that we are doing, stuff that we want to really do from an overall, haptic administration standpoint. What are we really spending on? We've done all of that. We've literally done cleanups on all of that. So I think, like the golden mantra, right?
Yeah.
Money saved is money earned. It's as simple as that, I think, and that is what we look at again. But at the same point of time, I think to be very conscious about this, while we've just spoken about savings over the last 10, 12 minutes.
Yeah.
I think one important part that's very, very, very key is the fact that you should also realize what your savings are coming at, right? Everything comes at
the
a cost.
Cost of the savings. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Employee satisfaction, right, is something that you should not compromise on, and something that we don't compromise on.
Yeah.
Right? If you realize that, for certain things there is a meeting that's really important, we permit the travel. You say, obviously, yes, obviously go ahead. We ensure that the teams are meeting each other at some given point of time in some shape or form. And yes, we spend that much amount of time, effort, and energy to ensure that these things happen and are taken care of. So I think it shouldn't be something like, you basically try to win something, but over a period of time, you end up losing a lot more.
Yeah, exactly. It's a trade-off, right? Like, because when you're thinking about one of the one of the smartest things I've learned in this last year and a half or so is that when you are actually looking to make a decision saying, hey, I'm going to remove this particular tool or I'm going to replace it, right? The problem is you have a bunch of your teams actually reliant on it. You can't just remove it. They're actually more productive because of that particular infrastructure or tool, right? Like, so then it becomes a question of like, can I actually buy it at the best way price. Or best price? And then can I actually get it on the, can I actually observe the spend, my usage of the tool and my sentiment of the tool to see whether they actually like it or not, to make renewal decisions. And then how do I make sure that this, like when I'm forecasting out for my budget or anything else, I actually have this spend budgeted out, because a non-budgeted spend is the most painful amount of spend to actually go through it. And I think it's just a good segue over there, right? Like what we wanted to
actually, let me just pause you on that one. I think another aspect of that one is also very clearly to also check for alternatives, right?
Yes.
So what are the features that you're actually using in the tool, right? If there are you're paying a premium price for 2 features and you're not using, say, the premium comes with 5 features, you're using just 2 of them. What's the alternative around it, right? Are the 2 really that critical that you need to spend that money? Exactly like you said, right? But I think alternatives is something that we've also benefited in some shape or form, right? Giving you a very quick example, we were using some tool to basically get screen recording and some more stuff beyond that. But we realized that beyond that stuff didn't add that much amount of value to the entire mass. So what we did is the people who really needed it, we kept them done that. The others we moved on the alternate. So you'd get the best of both worlds.
Correct.
Right. But that's another way to do it.
That makes sense. And I think just wanted to ask folks in the audience as well, if there's any questions, please feel free to ask. But in the meantime, we just wanted to say one thing that we're offering as well to folks on the webinar is we can do a free savings analysis of your stack and tell you exactly how much you can save. And it's something that we offer to everybody who joins in. So I think, Meda, if you don't mind putting up the poll, just for folks to answer, it's just we run that data against our benchmarks because we're buying for multiple people at the same time. We have about $150 million of transactions where we can actually get this done for you pretty quickly. So let us know, and we're happy to help in that. Perfect. And this is just a good segue into the next piece as well, Ajay.
Sure.
I mean, with all of this, right? You said retention, you talked about cost reduction, and you talked about growth, but it's really hard to figure all of this out in the context of a business, right? If you have to go, especially as a finance leader, your partner is actually going to be your board on one end, and the other partner is your CEO, right? So how do you actually communicate these strategies into numbers that the CEO and the board can actually understand? And what are those metrics that you're actually measuring? So that they for example, right? the CEO is looking at benchmarks. The board is also looking at benchmarks. What are the metrics and what are the benchmarks that we can actually look towards?
So I think the benchmarks basically will depend industry to industry.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And I think, but I can give you the metrics very, very clearly in terms of what we basically monitor ourselves on.
Yeah.
Interestingly, now that my role is basically looking at both the customer side as well as the finance aspect of it.
So you have complete ownership of it.
I love it, surely.
Yeah.
But it obviously adds a lot of stuff in terms of how you are, it obviously makes you a lot more responsible in terms of every decision that you're actually taking, and, definitely helps me take this with a much more larger view. So one of the things that we definitely measure on our side is to go back and look at the growth percentage, or what's your net revenue retention over a period of time with the customers. So that I think is a very key parameter. What's your churn looking like at the customer level? I think that's another key parameter that we go back and measure ourselves on. And obviously the last two ones, they primarily then depend upon how we run the business. So which is basically what does your cash flow look like and what is your collections looking like, right? How long does the customer take to pay? What exactly happens? Are they paying, not paying? All of that stuff falls under that bucket. I think a combination of these four parameters actually helps us decide and take a lot more decisions within the organization in terms of overall spends also, right? Because at the end of it, the first two give you the premise of basically customer growth, advocacy, and effectively long-term business, while the last two primarily give you the premise and the view of how you want to sustain yourselves, or is every way looking okay or not, right?
Yeah.
And whether you have the money to basically go back and pay or not. I think those are the ways that we actually look at Haptik, particularly in terms of monitoring. I think that sums it up.
Yeah, and so you, just to sum it up, you said NRR, you said churn. You also looked at cash flows and collections as well, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
Yeah, got it. And I just wanted to for the folks in the audience, we were able to pull a bunch of benchmarks for, especially if you're, this is particular to a B2B SaaS business, but and it's something that happy to share as well, because just year-on-year growth and what is the net dollar retention, which Ajay spoke about.
Yep.
What is the these are other benchmarks over here, but this is just for you as FYI for the folks on the call, that this is what the board essentially looks at when saying, hey, this is how I compare your metrics to what the averages look like in the entire space, right? This is just just from Iconic Growth in terms of what just a pool of folks they've actually got this data from. Obviously, depends on the stage you are, the type of business, all of that, like what Ajay mentioned. But this is just something that we wanted to put out there for folks as well. But in the meantime, I'll just pause here. Any other questions from folks so that we can help answer? Please go ahead. And in the meantime, Ajay and I will keep going forward. So it leads to actually my next question, Ajay, which is a bunch of changes have happened in the last couple of years, right? And the best analogy I use is CFOs and the finance team used to be looked at like the referees, right? When somebody's trying to go spend money, they're the ones who are blowing the whistle at the last moment, saying, "Don't go do it," right? But now it's like the CFOs and the finance orgs have become like the point guard in basketball, right? They're actually passing the ball to the right person at the right time to go make the right decision. So in the modern, in the B2B world, what that implies is that finance leaders are now looked at to provide the right data, the right tools, and the right context to the end decision makers to enable them to make better decisions, right? So that change has happened. But along with that, we've seen some people cross over, but a lot of folks are still closer to the referee, and some folks have crossed over to the point guard, right? So what are the couple of things that you see finance leaders need to really upskill themselves, and what are the skills that folks are looking for in that role?
I think it's a great question, and somehow I don't know how it feels like this is me, right? When you ask me this question in terms of basically the changes that I've been through, right? So I started off very quickly giving you a background. I started off with the finance role pretty much at Haptik, been an ops guy for most of my life. But learned a lot over these years, right? I think very clearly the entire aspect of finance, right, is not just no longer the old aspect, like you said, where somebody just is there as a guardrail and telling you what to do, what not to do. I think it's now to do a lot with the finance teams now involving themselves at the customer side as well, right? Uh, through the conversation, we've spoken about growth, we've spoken about retention. And I think these are, again, two aspects which the finance leader can also review or monitor, or should monitor, in my view, moving ahead to ensure sustenance of the business, right? And I think that's where the whole part of basically getting the pulse of the customer, right? Just ensuring and noting that whether the invoice is getting paid and things are working fine is no longer a checkbox for a finance leader anymore. In my view, I think the finance leader should have a pulse of the customer's business also, right? Should keep eyes, ears open to go back and say what is happening in their industry. For example, with the current whole state of layoffs, etc., all of that stuff that's happening. If you have a customer who's going to be bound or going to get impacted by that, how does that impact your business? Whether retention will happen, not happen? What is their current positioning in terms of invoicing payouts, right? Where are they right now? I think all these factors should really go back and should be somebody that finance leader should keep an eye on. So in my view, I think it is about having a pulse of the customer, very, very, very essential in terms of where they are.
I'll just maybe just add on one second order effects of having the pulse of the customer.
Sure.
So especially when you're talking to other department heads and you're trying to convince them to your point of view, until you actually have that pulse of the customer, it's very hard to go convince them. Right? Like they will not listen to you if you do not have that pulse of the customer. So once you do, they listen to you even more. Like you are part of that conversation. You're part of that table where you're when you're making customer decisions as well on what strategy, what is the roadmap, how do you actually look forward to it. That's just something that I wanted to add when I've seen.
No, exactly, and I think rightly said. So if you have information that's even beyond your role, I think you definitely get hurt, right? In terms of going back and making somebody understand what you're trying to say. And obviously, anybody who's doing it is doing it for the benefit of the org. They're not trying to just saying it to prove a point.
Yeah,
so I think absolutely valid. I think another aspect after that is to go back and understand also that today we are providing an X amount of service, or we're providing a service. What is the utilization of the service with the customer? Right?
Yeah.
How much are they really utilizing our services or our product? Right? If the utilization is low, that's a red flag. If the utilization is green, then great. It brings you the opportunity to grow further, right? And I think that's another pulse that somebody should keep an eye on, purely because of the fact that then that impacts retention, at least in today's times. When somebody wants to come back and renew. Just going back to our example previously, right, where I talked about alternative.
Yeah.
If we are a product that is priced at, say, $100, right, and just for an example, and you realize that there's another product available at $60, but with half the features, and I'm using only those half, why do I want to spend 100? Right.
That's true.
I think that's something that we think today. Obviously, that's something that every customer also thinks today, because everybody's living in the same world, right? So I think everybody wants to save cost. Everybody wants to basically make the best buck out of what they're really spending, all of that. So I think looking at that angle, the utilization, in my view, is super, 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 super important. And a finance leader will need to take that extra step to understand and learn and figure out the utilization of the service. I think with the org, what it'll also bring is it'll bring another perspective of somebody looking at it and trying to say that, okay, there's another way to probably monitor this. So I think that's another aspect of it. And I think last but not the least is also to understand not only just the customer's business, but also understand your business deeply, right? I am still in the learning phase to go back and also, get the most out of the product. There are still some times you have to pick up the phone, figure out from a tech lead in terms of how do you exactly, how do you do this? And I think that gives me a lot of learning, because then I apply that to a lot of discussions when I'm having with my customer side, when I wear the customer hat on, and when I'm talking to a customer, I'm able to go back and then pick up those aspects of it. I think these are three key principles that I've adapted over the last 6 to 8 months now for myself to basically grow beyond just the finance leader that I have as a role to play.
Nice.
And that I think helps me to take decisions a lot better.
That's actually very interesting as well. Like, and when we saw that happen, in all honesty, we saw better decision making across the board as well, right? Like, because technically you have the data that will empower others to make the decision, and if you're in the room, you actually have the potential to voice your opinion, have the data to back it, and then make sure that that core stakeholder, who's the other department leader, understands why that's actually happening.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. That's pretty cool. Like, I think there's a question from the audience as well, right? Like, there is this quick question. I think what it says is how to balance the need for cost cutting and efficiency with the need to invest in new technology, right? Because like investing in like automation, investing in like the future, or like just new tool, new processes, new systems, new technology that's always coming out. But there's also like, hey, we need to make sure that it's actually efficient and we're if we're actually in the cost reduction mode. What do you suggest?
So the way I normally do this is the fact that, when I'd go back and try and understand that what is it that this is actually going to give us, right? You're investing into a particular technology, sure. What's the ROI against it, right? Is the ROI basically going to give you results in 3 months, 6 months, a year, right? And then depending upon the appetite of the organization is when you go back and make that investment. Another part that to be a little conscious about is the fact is that you don't invest into it 100% at day one, right? You go back, you do a little bit of it, get into one stage, go back, take a look at it, and then effectively go back and do it. So for example, very simple, right? Say I want to buy a tool that basically will save or get me automation up to an X%, right?
Yeah.
But will give me automation only up to X% over a period of 3 months. Now, do I want to buy licenses for the entire org, or do I want to start with say 5-10 people, monitor the efficiency of those 5-10 people, and then effectively bring it out to everybody?
And
right.
And that's the beauty of SaaS as well, right? You can actually do that
Exactly.
instead of old school ways of running it.
Precisely. Obviously, for if you want to automate some stuff, like there's a lot of stuff that like the way we do at Haptik, right? At Haptik, what we go back and say is we never come back and say that, hey, we're gonna go back and replace humans, right? We've never said that. What we've always said that is that we basically gonna bring in the efficiency of giving responses back to customer. Today, the experience needs to get better, right? So our entire commerce stack actually brings in a lot more enhanced experience for the customer. Similarly, on the support aspects of stuff that we do, that brings in efficiency. But both of these, right, from a tech standpoint, effectively will give you ROI over a next period of time when you work with us, etc. All of that stuff. So measure that, invest into it, and then effectively monitor it. That's how I would do it.
Makes sense. And I think there's a second question, like a little bit more particular. I think it's a question. I can also take a stab at it after the thing. Sure. What are your views on a contract lifecycle management tool? What factors do you think about when it looked at procuring an effective contract lifecycle management tool, right? Like it's I think something's particular. It's just a question is how do you manage your contracts? I think is the more relevant question over there, and how do you get it done at Haptik?
So we basically do use a contract life management tool, right? We're utilizing it. I think it's a good investment if you've actually gone back and you really do everything through it, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things, for any tool, for it to succeed is that you have to change internal processes. Right?
Exactly.
We no longer do any signing of contracts over digital signatures or any of that, unless and until a customer specifically does come back and request for it, which also then gets routed through the contract management tool itself.
Yeah.
Earlier, it used to come through where there would be a set of contracts to be signed, then you go back, sign them, you send them back. It's all now automated through the tool, right?
Yeah.
I think the tools today available within the contract life management basically give you provisions to do multiple things. I think there is simultaneous edits available. One of the brilliant features that I've actually seen on a contract life management tool is that you send something to somebody deleted stuff and sent it back to you. It actually compares versions and tells you, hey, this one's been deleted off completely, so many basic things that you actually want and stuff that you do manually. I think all of that stuff is easily available and very effective.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to it, right? Like there's a bunch of tools out there. Depends on your use case. If you are really looking to optimize your sales contracts, your vendor contracts, well, what's what do you really want to solve for? And make sure you get that stakeholder who really needs to use the tool in the procurement process, because if they're not bought in, you can't force something on them, right? Like, so make sure that they feel part of the process. That's one thing that we always encourage, is that make sure the end stakeholder is also, their opinion is valuable. And so once they feel part of it, they want to make it successful. So that's the best way to tackle any decision you make, any tool you pick. Make sure that they're part of the process, and we go there. But Mira, so there is just one other question that I wanted to get to as well. You also need a team that you need to put in place when you're executing all of this, right? Like one of the hardest things to do, I've heard this from a lot of folks, is that hiring good talent across the board is hard, and in finance is a little bit harder. And so what do you think? What are the strategies that you can actually use to attract and retain top finance talent?
How do I retain top finance talent? So one, obviously,
or attract as well.
Yeah,
attract
sure.
first and then retain.
Yeah. So I think there are 2-3 parts to it. I think, but a very valid question. I think the first thing that we've always been able to do is that, we've internally gone back and spent a lot of time and effort at Haptik to ensure employee satisfaction within the organization. So culture is something that we've consciously spent time on, right? I think starting from Akrit right on top, right, to every person within the organization, right? I think we exhibit our culture of how we really want to work, right? And I think we talk about it often, so people do realize about it as well, right? So we've definitely spent a lot of time and effort. I think that over the years has effectively given Haptik a good brand image in terms of an organization that people want to work for. So I think that takes care of the attract part for us very, very clearly.
Nice.
And let me be very honest about it. It's not an easy task. It's not easy to constantly just keep doing the right things. Obviously, over a period of time, a lot of things become second nature, and they basically become a part of how we actually do it. But I think to just continuously even evolve and then keep growing, that is the tough part, which honestly we take pride in the fact that we love doing that, right? And we don't do it only because of the fact that we want to attract, but we very clearly are on a mission of the fact that we want to be one of the organizations where people should just come enjoy themselves, but collectively our output should make a difference in the world. So that's what we're here for. I think that's something we've established very clearly as a part of our culture. So that is something that brings in people. I think from the retention standpoint, it again, at least within my teams, I make one part very, very, very clear is about, I speak to people a lot often. I make point to have that chai, that coffee, and all of the other stuff, even with the most junior-most person within my team, purely just to understand, because like very recently, right, I had coffee with somebody who joined us 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And I said, great, you've joined us 2 months ago. How does it feel? So the answer she gave us, oh, everything's fine. And that's exactly what we expect, right? So I said, okay, can you tell me what you mean by everything is fine? Because there was a job description that you had, and today there's some stuff that you do, and you've realized this over 2 months of how you need to do your stuff. How different is it? And she said, believe me, it's 95% accurate. So I clearly knew what I was getting into, right? So I think, great. So we've done a great job in terms of saying what we want. We've evaluated you on that. And today you are doing exactly that. So I think that's a very big check mark for me to come back and say that people really like what they're doing because they knew what they got into. There's no surprises, right? And I think when I've started looking at people from that particular angle, right, in terms of, is this what you wanted to do? Is this what you're doing? I think they really enjoy it, right? And now the fact is, my next question is to go back and understand, there is this, in finance has got this thing, because I'm a lot more ops oriented, for me, my first answer is let's solve for it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the first thing that comes to my head. So and I was like, this stuff that we do every month, it's
Yeah.
mundane. Everybody does
Yeah.
the same thing. The most dreaded days of our lives is 31st of March, which is
Yeah.
coming right now, right? So the year ending, the quarter ending, all of that, right? So I'm like, how can we do this differently, right? How can we really enjoy this process of every quarter, every year?
Yeah.
And we honestly are now putting our brains to it to come back and say, what is it that we can do a lot more in terms of being prepped a lot better? It's
Mm.
bound to happen. There is a year end, there is a quarter end. We
Yeah, it's
have to do
always.
certain activities. There's a task that needs to be done. There's compliance that needs to be done. But how do we prep ourselves better for it that we really enjoy it? And I think I really don't like when we are really stressed at some points to come back and say,
Yeah.
oh, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this. And then you tend to make errors. You tend to basically do things for the kick of doing it. I think that's the culture that I'm enabling within the finance team, particularly to come back and also say that, hey, let's get a lot more differently prepared. Let's do differently. Like, I'm not saying people don't do it. People do it. People try and do as much as they can.
Yeah.
But trying to just
Especially.
figure out how else can we do it through different organizations. What have you done differently previously in your previous study? That way kinds of stuff.
I really love that point that you mentioned, because like Haptik is a high growth company, and like one of the major things that I see this happen every day. We write a job description, we interview them, and then when they join, they're like, okay, this is not what I signed up for. There's a 50% gap between what I signed up for, what I do. Very hard to get it right, and it's awesome that you were able to get that right. Like it's
Yeah.
incredible on that journey.
Thank you. And I think that will solve a lot of your problems.
Lot of it.
Right.
Lot of it.
Because
yeah.
then the person knows what they've signed up for. Right.
Yeah.
And sure, there'll be 10 things that don't happen within the org, right? There are 15 things that the org can do better.
Yeah.
Never that'll always be there. But I
Yeah.
think at least if you've got the fitment and the association right, then I think it takes care
Makes
of a
sense.
lot of stuff.
I think it's a nice, I think the last question we'll take.
Sure.
One, just keeping cost optimization in mind, right? Like you spoke about March 31st coming out. So
Yep.
what are the some tools that use, like types of tools that you would put in place that you've put in place to automate a little bit of your work and from a finance perspective?
I think we've used some internal tools to basically manage certain reconciliations of ours.
Nice.
Because we are a SaaS business, there's a lot of user stuff, etc. We've put in some tools to do that. That helps us to basically
Is
look
it
at
something
billing.
internally built, or are you using like a billing subscription management tool or something
A
like that?
combination of both.
Got it.
Right? I think that primarily helps us to keep this absolutely sane in terms of what we're actually doing, and obviously looking at the fact that we're doing this absolutely right. So I think something that talks between two systems is something that we've gone back and built, and that actually helps us to do this.
Nice.
Another part is that we are now building on something that will help us a lot more on the collection side. Still work in progress, but there's some work happening on that one. I think these are two things primarily that will actually help us within the finance ecosystem.
Awesome. I think just to summarize, it's one on the billing side and one on the collection side. So it actually directly affects your
revenue,
collections, and your cash flow. So I think awesome. Great. I will folks, feel free to please connect with Ajay. I think Ajay, you're best reachable on LinkedIn.
Yes, I am.
Yes, awesome. So Ajay is reachable on LinkedIn. I'm also on LinkedIn. So if you folks need any other questions answered, we'll be able to help. And thank you so much for joining and being part of this webinar. Ajay, thank you so much for sharing your insights and through this entire process. It's been a pleasure, and hope to meet you in Bombay very soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on this one.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.